All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here with us tonight for this program. My name is Emily Anderson. I am the Assistant Adult Programming and Outreach Coordinator for the Dauphin County Library System. And thank you so much for joining us for this installment of our Lawyers and Libraries Civil Legal Services Help. We are very lucky and very happy to have these folks here with us today to discuss the topic of expungement eligibility. Couple announcements before we start. If you would please remain muted for the duration of the program. We'll have an opportunity for Q&A afterwards, but also feel free to type questions in the chat as we go along, but please keep your microphone muted for the duration of the program for the sake of audio. Let's see, our next installment of our Lawyers and Libraries series will be on March 25th at 6 p.m. And we will be talking about how to restore your driver's license. Briefly, I'm going to introduce Sandy. Sandy is Dauphin County's Bar Association's Pro Bono and Public Services Coordinator. And without further ado, thank you so much, Sandy, for being here. Thank you, Kara. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sarah. And I'll hand it over to you.
Yes. And thank you, Emily. We are, on behalf of the Dauphin County Bar Association and MidPenn Legal Services, we are delighted to participate in this new public outreach series on with the library, the Dauphin County Library, which is such a tremendous source of information and accurate information for the community these days. So we are happy to participate with them. The Dauphin County Bar Association is also happy to introduce our organizer for this event. Kara Pike is our pro bono lawyer of the year. We only have one per year, and she is it. And the reason that she's recognized is because for the last several years, Kara has organized her law firm, Saul Ewing, to provide expungement clinics on a periodic basis with CareerLink and other community programs. And so we were recognizing her for her service to the community. And we want to also thank her for today organizing tonight's panel. And I will turn it over to Kara.
Thank you very much, Sandy. I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Kara Pike. As Sandy said, I'm an attorney at Saul Ewing. And I just wanted to put in that those clinics are a partnership. They're a partnership with MidPenn Legal Services, with DCBA, and the Nonstop Health from Sandy, and other colleagues from my firm. So I just wanted to put that out there. But I'm an attorney at Saul Ewing, like I said. I've been doing, expungements. I said this to Sandy before. I have a passion for it. I think that there needs to be information available to members of our community. I think it is something that will continue to grow in our state, the access to expungements, clean slate, etc. So while this is not my practice area as a lawyer, it's something that I personally am passionate about. And when I was asked to do this presentation, I reached out to one of my, she's not a colleague, but a friend, I guess you could say, Sarah, and asked her, and she pulled in Dave to assist with this presentation. So I'm going to let them do a quick introduction of themselves, and then I'll go more into the substantive area and give you an overview of what we're going to talk about. So go ahead, Sarah.
Sure. Thank you, Kara. And my name is Sarah Hyser-Staub. I'm also an attorney. I am a member at McNees, Wallace, and Nurick litigation group, where I practice primarily white-collar criminal defense and also commercial litigation. So I have a split practice, a little bit of civil work and a little bit of criminal work. And was recently joined at my firm by David Freed, who I'll let him introduce himself, but is an excellent member of our team, and I think is probably going to be the real gem of knowledge tonight. And so it was an easy choice to ask him to help us.
Well, good evening, everyone. And I'm really excited to be here. I think Kara and I are going to be best friends because I also have a passion for this issue. I was a district attorney for a long time in Cumberland County, and then I was United States Attorney for the Middle District of Pennsylvania. And I just joined Sarah over here at the McNees firm in January, but I've been working on issues surrounding expungement since around 2006. Certainly on a day-to-day basis as a prosecutor, but also on legislative matters in the Capitol. And it's been that long that it's taken for Pennsylvania to move forward on these issues. So we still have a long way to go, but we really have come a long way. It's a complicated area of the law, unfortunately, sometimes overly complicated. But what we'll try to do tonight is to explain it as clearly as we can and give you some ideas and resources about where to go if you have other questions. So we're going to do this as a team, and Kara's going to lead off, so I'll turn it back over to her.
Thank you, Dave. If Emily could start to pull up the slides, but to just give you, while this is termed expungement, it's a presentation on expungement. We are also, when you say the word expungement, other things come up like clean slate. You'll hear a lot. That's a somewhat newer law. We will discuss pardons, and juvenile. We'll focus on expungements, but also juvenile expungements, because I think they are, they have their own things that need to be discussed separate and apart generally from expungements. And then Sarah is going to talk about clean slate, like I mentioned, and limited access. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'm going to cover expungements, and I just thought that this was an important fact to highlight. Why do we need expungements? Well, approximately 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record, and half of all children in the US have at least one parent with a criminal record. And I think, like I said, this is a passion for me, but at the clinics that we've had, I've heard so many people talk about how it has been, it really has stopped them from being able to get employment, to get licensed, or they've lost their license. So I just think it's really an area of law that the community could have help with, and that we can hopefully provide some clarification, because like Dave said, even for lawyers, it's a very confusing area of law. It's complicated. There's not necessarily black and white answers, but hopefully we can give you some guideposts and some resources. Next slide, please. For some reason, I can't really see the full slide, so I'm just going to try and go with it. So what is an expungement? We use this term. I didn't know really what it meant before I started to get involved. So expungement is a mechanism to permanently, I think, delete, I can't see the word, criminal record information is.
There we go. Now we're back, I think.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry about that. I apologize.
Sorry. Yeah, no, that's fine. It actually permanently removes your criminal record history. So it doesn't exist anymore. So employers wouldn't be able to see it, or should not be able to see it, which is important for a lot of the community members that we've talked to. So it is a court-ordered administrative act of destroying or removing criminal history record information, such as an arrest, conviction. Expunge is defined in Pennsylvania law in part as to remove information so there is no trace or indication that it ever existed. Next slide, please. So there's a statute that outlines certain things that must be expunged. It's very limited, and one thing that I was most surprised at when I first started this is I didn't even realize that non-conviction records, so if somebody gets arrested, that was still, like an employer could type in your name and would still have access to that information. You weren't convicted necessarily, you didn't have any official next step with it, but people could see that, and maybe they would stop, they wouldn't consider you because they see you have an arrest, even though you were not necessarily guilty. So non-conviction records, a court will direct that non-conviction data be expunged. So this includes, some of these are legal terms, but if you have a disposition of not guilty, or if a charge is ultimately withdrawn, or if it's dismissed. Another kind of non-conviction record is ARD. So if, as a part of your proceeding, you receive ARD and you successfully complete the program, I think there probably are certain offenses that are accepted from this, but that information can be expunged. And then if there is an acquittal of an offense, so like Dave said, there's been a lot of progress in the last couple of years. There was recently a law passed in 2020 that provides for automatic expungement upon a judicial determination that a person has been acquitted of all charges. And it has to arise from the same criminal episode. So there's another circumstance where information must be expunged, and that is underage drinking. So if after you turned 18, you had a citation for underage drinking, once you turn 21, and I'm pretty sure, you know, you have to be free of arrests or any other type of convictions, and you satisfy all the conditions of your sentence, that underage drinking conviction can be expunged. Next slide, please. But those are still very narrow circumstances, right? You think, okay, well, a lot of people who have a criminal history record, they have felonies on their record, they have misdemeanors. There are other areas where it's discretionary, where an expungement can be available. We were talking about this prior to our presentation that, you know, Dave, who has a very long career in Pennsylvania in criminal law, said that he thinks in his whole time, maybe one offender successfully received an expungement that was over 70 years of age. And so elderly offenders reaching 70 years of age who are free from prosecution for 10 years following release from confinement. So you have to have 10 years where you have not had any other arrests or convictions, and you must be over the age of 70 in order to have that prior record expunged. There's oddly also a situation where an expungement is available for an offender who has been dead for 3 years. I don't know of any case where this has actually been expunged, but I'm sure it exists. And then the bigger one that is more applicable to a larger population of people are summary offenses. So on your criminal history record, usually it will say you have a conviction or there was a case brought against you, you'll have a list of the offenses. And some of them will be labeled as an S, or which stands for summary offense. So these types of offenses, disorderly conduct, loitering, you can petition the court for expungement if you've been free of arrest or prosecution 5 years following the conviction for that offense. So if you had a disorderly conduct in 2010 and it's now 2016, and since that time you've had no other arrests or prosecutions or convictions or jail time, etc., then you would be eligible for an expungement upon petition to the court. Next slide, please. So I actually did not realize this when I was putting together this information. I mentioned, and we'll go, Dave will go more into detail later in the presentation about what a pardon is and what's eligible for pardon. But if you receive a pardon, that does not necessarily mean that you're, and in fact, I think it does not mean that you're, that you will have a judicial expungement of that record. Okay, that's how the law used to be. So you still have to petition a court. So you still have to go to court, fill out the expungement petition, pay the fine, and in order to get those pardon convictions expunged. But the law that was passed in 2020 now allows for automatic expungement of a pardon conviction. However, there is a time period that the state or Commonwealth can object to that expungement. I don't really know what the circumstance would be for that, but that's progress, and that it would allow for an automatic expungement, and the individual wouldn't then have to go to court to do this next step for expungement of a pardon conviction. Next step, or next slide, please. So a lot of the individuals I meet with, you know, sometimes when you have multiple convictions, there's different instances years apart. There may be a felony on your record. There may be a high-level M1 on your record. Those are not available for expungement. The only circumstance that they would be is if those convictions have been pardoned by the governor. So, but in terms of just doing a petition for expungement related to these offenses, that is not available. Sarah's going to talk about limited access and clean slate. So certain misdemeanors are eligible under clean slate, but in terms of expungement, it's a fairly limited area, and there are limited offenses that you can actually have expunged. And I remember learning about this when I was first doing these clinics, is that you also can expunge dismissed. So dismissed charges would technically fall in that non-conviction data that I was talking about before, where you didn't end up with a guilty plea, guilty conviction. But if say you're arrested and there are 3 charges, and the defendant pleads guilty to 1, but then the Commonwealth will say, we'll dismiss the other 2 charges if you plead guilty to this 1 offense. Those other 2 offenses that were dismissed as a part of that plea agreement, they cannot be expunged. So that means that non-conviction data can't be erased through the expungement process. Okay, next page, please. So I kind of gave you a general overview of expungements, and as you can see, it is somewhat limited, but if you're somebody that has summary offenses or there's non-conviction data, like if you look your name up and on a docket sheet it has an arrest or information, you know, that's a route that you should definitely try to take. I just want to mention there are a couple pre-steps in order to accomplish that. One, you have to obtain your criminal history, your official criminal history record from the Pennsylvania State Police. There's a small cost to that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but somewhere in the range of $10 to $25. That's always the first step. So keep that in mind, that you need to get that before you would go petition the court. And a lot of the county courts, I believe, have forms, like standard forms, that it'll be a petition for expungement, and you just have to fill out information. So it makes it somewhat easier if you're not represented. And then also I want to mention, you know, I've partnered with MidPenn Legal Services. They do have certain requirements related to income, but they are a really good resource that you can reach out to for the expungement process to see if you're eligible for their services. So I just wanted to mention that. Now I'm going to hand it over to Dave, who's going to specifically discuss juvenile expungement, and then he's going to wrap his presentation up with pardons, which I think will help for people who have felonies or higher convictions for misdemeanors. So take it away, Dave.
Okay, thanks, Kara. And I want to back up a couple of things that Kara said. I think it's $10 for your official record. And she's 100% correct that most counties have forms. You go to the clerk of court's office, and almost all counties have a form for an expungement petition, because they know there's a recognition of how important it is for people. And finally, I'll just echo what Kara said about MidPenn Legal Services. I've worked closely with them over the years, and if they can't help you because of perhaps income guidelines or conflicts, they'll direct you in the right direction. So it's a very helpful group over there, and I would always recommend reaching out to them with a problem. So I'm going to speak about juvenile expungements and then pardons. So it's important to realize that adults and juveniles are treated very differently in Pennsylvania when they're charged with crimes. The wording of the statutes are different. The Juvenile Act, which is what controls juvenile prosecutions, is really focused on the offender, focused on trying to rehabilitate the offender, because of the recognition that it applies to young people 18 years of age and younger, and that they should be treated differently under the law. Now, for certain serious crimes, those cases will automatically go to adult court, but those aren't the kind of cases we're going to generally be talking about today. They're not filed by filing an arrest report or a criminal complaint at the magisterial district judge. Juvenile cases are filed by a petition in the court. There are no juries in juvenile court. And if a juvenile is ultimately found to have committed what they've been accused of beyond a reasonable doubt, the judge will say that that juvenile is adjudicated delinquent as opposed to being convicted. So it's just important to remember that juvenile and adult court are very different in Pennsylvania. Can I have the next slide, please? And as I said, they're adjudicated delinquent, not convicted. Now, having said that, a juvenile adjudication stays on your record just like a conviction would in adult court. So when we're talking about expungement, it's really very important that we talk about juvenile expungement of juvenile records as well. Now, another big difference between the Juvenile Act and the criminal law in Pennsylvania is that expungement is favored by the Juvenile Act. You know, the adult side has sort of caught up to where the juvenile side it's kind of caught up to the juvenile side, and expungements is often required, although it's not automatic. There's still a petition process that has to take place. However, in a lot of counties, and I know Cumberland is one, I think Dauphin is another one, the expungement process, or the petition for expungement, is actually generated by juvenile probation. So if you've got a juvenile adjudication, you generally don't even need to do anything. The juvenile probation authorities will generate that expungement petition for you. Now, for more serious crimes that are committed by juveniles, offenders are still generally eligible for expungement 5 years after final discharge. So think about it like this. You turn 18, you're discharged from juvenile supervision. If you stay crime-free for 5 years, it's pretty likely your juvenile adjudication will be eligible for expungement upon petition. Now, having said that, there are some serious crimes that render people ineligible, and we'll talk about those here in a moment. So let's just remember, even though that juvenile adjudications and criminal convictions are different, they both stay on your record, and there's a process that has to be engaged in to make those juvenile adjudications go away as well. Next slide, please. All right, so who might be eligible for juvenile expungement? Well, it's a broader category certainly broader than adult expungement. I think Kara certainly let us know that if people have adult convictions, it can be very difficult to get an expungement. Well, in juvenile court, it's I won't say it's simpler, but it's a broader category of folks who may be entitled. So juvenile delinquency, that means people who've been adjudicated delinquent or essentially, quote, convicted, unquote, in juvenile court may be eligible. And also cases that involve summary offenses committed by individuals who are under 18. So those are very low-level offenses, like maybe a harassment or an underage drinking that Kara mentioned, or maybe a disorderly conduct. Those can be eligible for expungement as well. Of course, if a complaint is unsubstantiated or a delinquency petition is filed and dismissed, that person, the subject of that complaint or petition, would be eligible to file a petition. Next slide, please. If a written allegation, so that's what a charge is called in juvenile court, a written allegation. If a written allegation is filled out and given to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor doesn't approve that, that person would be eligible for expungement. If 6 months have passed since the individual successfully completed an informal adjustment and no adjudication proceeding or conviction is pending. So what that means is sometimes in juvenile court, especially for lower level misdemeanors and even sometimes a felony, the prosecution and the defense will work out an informal adjustment. It's sort of like ARD, accelerated rehabilitative disposition, in the adult system, and they'll work out it could be all sorts of things that the offender has to do. Often it involves restitution. Sometimes it's an apology. Think about maybe a case of vandalism. It might, if it was spray painting, it might involve cleaning the place that was spray painted. So you can think of all sorts of things that might be done. If a juvenile successfully completes their informal adjustment, and everybody agrees they're not going to move forward to adjudication, and 6 months have passed and that juvenile has stayed out of trouble, that person would be eligible for an expungement. And then also, if 6 months have passed since final discharge from supervision and no proceeding or conviction is pending, next slide, please. And or if the individual is 18 years of age or older, 6 months have passed since everything's been satisfied, and that time has not been convicted of a felony misdemeanor, and nothing is pending, or the individual is 18 and was convicted of underage drinking when they were under 18, and 6 months has passed. Next slide, please. And also, if 5 years have passed since final discharge from commitment, placement, probation, or other disposition, and the person hasn't been convicted of a felony misdemeanor or adjudicated delinquent. So that's a long way of saying that unless you've committed a very serious crime, you will be eligible for juvenile expungement, perhaps at 6 months after turning 18 or after you're off supervision, but in no event more than 5 years later. Now, a petition has to be filed. The attorney for the Commonwealth, that would be the DA, has to consent, and the judge would have to sign off. I mentioned Cumberland and Dauphin County. In places where it's often generated by juvenile probation, that will all be taken care of. Juvenile probation will generate the petition, send it through to the DA, who will sign off. It'll go to the judge and just get signed. But it's important to note, sometimes even when the attorney for the Commonwealth objects, a judge could still order expungement. So a petition could be filed, the Commonwealth could object, and then there could be a hearing, and the judge could still order it. So you're not out, of course, the easiest way to do it is to get the DA to agree, the Commonwealth attorney to consent, but even if they don't, you're not completely out of the woods. It's still possible to get that juvenile expungement. Next slide, please. All right, so exceptions. Who won't be eligible to file a petition? Well, it's essentially people who've committed serious crimes. Excuse me. So a crime, if committed by an adult, would be classified as rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, aggravated indecent assault, attempt, solicitation, or conspiracy to commit these offenses, and was adjudicated delinquent. So essentially, a serious sexual offense committed by someone 14 years of age or older would generally be ineligible for juvenile expungement, or if there's cause shown. So for anybody who might be eligible, if the prosecutor objects and has cause to show why it shouldn't be expunged, a judge may agree and refuse to expunge. I can tell you in my experience, that's very rare. Juvenile offenders who are eligible generally get their charges expunged via petition, and I can tell you most of the time the attorney for the Commonwealth agrees to it. The next two things are just the rules that apply. But I want to talk for one more moment before we move on to pardons about exceptions to juvenile expungement. You might say, oh my gosh, well, if you're only talking about serious sex offenses, what about a robbery with a weapon or a homicide? Well, under our Juvenile Act now, those cases go immediately to adult court. So they wouldn't be taken care of in juvenile court, and you wouldn't be trying to get a juvenile expungement. However, not all cases of felonies or even robberies or felony burglaries go to adult court. A lot of those are taken care of in juvenile court. And what this shows you is that the only things that are statutorily ineligible are the sex offenses. So you could have a very serious offense as a juvenile, a burglary, which is a felony of the first degree, or a robbery, which can be a felony of the first or second degree, and still be eligible for juvenile expungement. So I think the takeaway for juvenile expungement is it's always something to think about. If you have a juvenile adjudication on your record, even if it's a serious offense, you should take a good serious look at juvenile expungement, because if you've been out of trouble for a number of years, you may very well be eligible. And I think that's it on juvenile expungement. We'll move on to pardons very quickly before we get to Sarah's part of the presentation. So if we could advance the slides. All right, so we're moving on to pardons now. And a pardon, so we're finished with juveniles. The only process for a juvenile adjudication is the juvenile expungement. We're moving on to pardons now. So what's a pardon? Well, a pardon is distinct and separate from expungement and limited access and clean slate, all this other stuff we're talking about. Everything we've been talking about in that regard so far, and what you'll hear about from Sarah, is a judicial function. A pardon is an executive function. If you think about it, there's been a lot of news. Every time a new president is elected, the president who's leaving on the way out the door issues pardons. This past president did it in a fashion that other presidents haven't done, so there was a huge amount of news about it. And it's an executive function. It's something that the executive can do. At the state level, here in Pennsylvania, it's actually a pretty well delineated process. We have a state board of pardons, and there's a specific process to seek a pardon. The pardons board will consider applications and make recommendations to the governor, who can accept or recommend. And that pardons board has hearings. So you can have the opportunity to present your case to the pardons board. You can do it with a lawyer. Often people don't and are successful nonetheless. So it's very important and easy. It's very easy, important for me to tell you, it's easy to find information about the pardon process. Just go to bop.pa.gov, boardofpardons.pa.gov, and you can find information about the process. There's a flow chart. There's sample petitions, and it's actually a really helpful resource. Also, and this is pretty new, there's an expedited review process for people who have nonviolent marijuana-related offenses. Those could be misdemeanors, those could be felonies. There's an expedited process for people seeking pardons there. Well, why are pardons important? Some of the stuff you'll hear about, you heard about expungement, you'll hear from Sarah about clean slate and limited access, and those are great. For people that aren't eligible for those programs, pardons can be a great process. And clean slate, expungement, and limited access are ideally there to help people out so that the pardons board can have more time to deal with folks who may have committed more serious offenses that wouldn't be eligible for those processes, but still are deserving of clemency, still are deserving of a pardon. And often that's people who made some very big mistakes when they were younger and have turned their lives around completely. As a district attorney, I saw petition after petition that I was pleased and happy to be able to agree to, because people had done so well. And I saw that one of our attendees left and was somewhat apologetic about it. We completely understand. The great thing about that is we're recording. So we can get, whoever wants to see this can get back in and take a look at it later. So if we get to the next slide on pardons. So what a pardon does is it relieves legal disabilities. It's as if the conviction never happened. And for most job applicants, almost all, you can deny you were ever convicted. A pardon wipes it away. It means it never happened. Now, as Kara discussed a little bit, it does not expunge convictions from criminal record. It may make you eligible for a clean slate or limited access automatically, which is great. But if you want it completely expunged, you'll still have to file a petition. Now, one of the clear eligibility situations for expungement is when you've received a pardon. So if you receive a pardon and you file for expungement, you have a very good chance of getting it. Now, what would be a situation where you might not? If the prosecutor in the particular county did not agree with the decision of the Board of Pardons, they may fight that expungement. Having said that, and having been involved and seen similar situations, I can tell you those petitions will almost invariably be successful. So the good news on pardons, although the pardons board is very busy, the good news on pardons is that clean slate and limited access and opening up expungements has resulted in the pardons board having a little less work and a little more opportunity to look at serious cases. I'm not saying the pardons board is not inundated with work. They are, but the state appropriately has dedicated and continues to dedicate more resources to the Pardons Board so that folks can get their pardon applications heard. Now, don't get me wrong, that process could be very long. It could be a process of 2 or 3 years to get through it. But the payoff at the end of the day, if you're successful, is that that criminal conviction is wiped away. And I would urge anyone who might not be eligible under clean slate or limited access to consider a pardon. I've seen it work time and time and time again. And even for people who have very serious criminal histories, if they can make a showing that they've turned their lives around, everybody in the system understands and respects that, and you will absolutely get a fair shake from the
Dave,
board.
can I?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. It's Sandy. I'm apologize for interrupting, but we have a question about what about your state representative's office? Are they able to assist people with the expungement or pardon process?
So they could point you in the right direction, Sandy. I think they could point you on the expungement process to where the clerk of court's office would be located in the county. And at the state level, they can point you where to go for the Board of Pardons. Depending on the level of constituent service in that representative's office, they may even make contact with the Board of Pardons for you. So listen, your state representatives and your state senators, they work for you. They're there to help you, and they have people dedicated to constituent services. So if people are comfortable making that outreach, I think they could find some help there, Sandy. That's a great question.
And in fact, we've had some excellent help in the past with some of the local Harrisburg state representatives as well. And I also wanted to just mention, someone came in a bit late, but we know if Dave, can you just in 2 sentences say expungements are pretty much only for summary offenses? I don't want to summarize too much.
What was that, Sandy? Yeah, expungements under the traditional process are generally summaries. Yeah.
Okay.
We in fact tried to get it for the misdemeanor 2s and misdemeanor 3s. When Sarah talks about clean slate, the things that you can get clean slate limited access for, we originally tried to do as an expungement bill, and we couldn't make that happen. But we did get clean slate ultimately and limited access, which is just as good for almost everybody.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's confusing with all the different terms.
It is.
But
It's
we're trying to accomplish the same thing. It's just
Yeah.
a different way to say it. Okay.
Yep. Okay, I think that's it for me on pardon, so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. And so that's a great segue into a discussion of clean slate and limited access. If we could have the next slide, please. So as we keep saying clean slate and limited access, it's sort of, it's a single sort of statutory scheme, but there's basically 2 parts to it. And so I think it's easier to think of it as two separate things. Clean slate is really an automatic process. And that's what is pretty neat and innovative about it, because it doesn't require you to do anything. It's just an automatic thing that happens if your record is eligible. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Limited access is kind of like the expungement process. It's petition based. So it requires you to actually fill out a form and file it with the court. But the goal of both of these programs is to seal your criminal record from public view. So unlike an expungement, the record still exists. It's not going to completely disappear, but it would be sealed so that the general public can't access it. So if you're an average person and you're going into the Pennsylvania, docket search and you type in your name, if you're benefiting from clean slate or limited access, you're not going to be able to find that record. However, you should know that certain parties will still have access to it. And those include employers who are required to consider your criminal history, certain state licensing agencies, if you're going to apply for an occupational license, law enforcement agencies, of course, the FBI, the state police can still see it, and then the state Supreme Court also will still have access. Next slide, please. So the big question that I know is probably on everyone's mind is who is eligible for this program? And I want to just emphasize, this is clean slate. So this is the automatic process. So a non-conviction, which Kara talked about at the beginning for expungements, if you were charged but the case was dismissed or you were acquitted, any kind of charge that resulted in you not being convicted, you're eligible for clean slate. Summary convictions are also eligible, but only if they're over older than 10 years and you've paid all of your court-ordered financial obligations. So that means you paid your fees, you paid your fines, you paid your restitution. And the really exciting part about Clean Slate is that misdemeanors, as Dave previewed, are eligible, certain misdemeanors. So second-degree misdemeanors and third-degree misdemeanors, or this lovely catch-all, which are ungraded offense convictions that carry a maximum penalty of 2 years in prison. That's just basically a way of catching what we call an ungraded misdemeanor. They pop up throughout the Pennsylvania law. There are certain statutes that have misdemeanor convictions, or sorry, misdemeanor provisions thrown in there. They're not assigned a particular grade, but they are captured by this as well. And keep in mind that it's a little bit counterintuitive. So a first-degree misdemeanor is actually the most serious type of misdemeanor, and then it goes down from there. So second degree and third degree, think of them as they're on the bottom. So they're less serious. So you should know that first-degree misdemeanors are not eligible for Clean Slate. But to continue that thought, these misdemeanors are eligible, but only if you've remained free from any other felony or misdemeanor conviction for 10 years and you've paid all your court-ordered financial obligations, like with the summary conviction. Next slide, please. So who is, this is the title of the slide is who is eligible, but it's really an exception slide. So these are the types of convictions that are ineligible. And there are a good number of exceptions. So offenses involving danger to a person, like harassment or assault, offenses against a family, some forms of child abuse, offenses involving firearms, so unlawful possession of firearms or other dangerous articles, sex offenses and failure to register, cruelty to animals, corruption of minors. And then there is another catch-all, which is any conviction that arose from the same case where you were convicted of a first-degree misdemeanor or higher, which would be a felony, or another misdemeanor that was charged at the same time as any of the offenses listed here. Next slide, please. So then there's a second type of exception. The previous slide talked about convictions that aren't eligible to be sealed under Clean Slate. These are convictions that if you've ever been convicted of any of these things, you're not eligible to seal your record, period. And that includes felonies. So if you have any kind of felony conviction, unfortunately, you're not going to qualify for Clean Slate. 2 or more first-degree misdemeanors or higher, 4 or more second or third-degree misdemeanors. And then there are some specific categories which are similar to the previous slide, but indecent exposure, cruelty to animals, failure to register as a sex offender. There's a specific type of crime known as weapons or implements for escape, or then individuals who are convicted of paramilitary training. And then there's a full list. I put the website here because this is quite a long list. This little list of bullet points doesn't capture the full range of convictions that would disqualify you. So I recommend taking a look at this list because there are quite a few. Next slide. So this is a little roadmap that I found on the PA Court's website that I thought was really neat because it gives you an idea of how this automatic process actually works. I think it's really designed for court personnel because some of these acronyms are not familiar to me, but just generally, I thought it would be helpful to illustrate for you how this would work. But basically, the court system will be running a search and it'll identify certain records that would be eligible for Clean Slate. It'll kick a report over to the Pennsylvania State Police, who will review the list and they'll report any objections back to Pennsylvania court system. It'll be verified in the court system, and then a judge will have an opportunity to review reports in various batches. And then after the judge reviews it, there will be sort of a systematic order issued that they can sign in batches, actually, so they can happen en masse. And then the public docket just doesn't show your your conviction any longer. And that process began in June of 2019. So it's been running for quite some time now. Next slide. So I wanted to just point out something I know that tonight's presentation is full of maybe a lot of bad news because unfortunately these programs are limited and it can feel like, there's a lot of exceptions and you might not qualify, but the good news is that Clean Slate has been sealing convictions since June 2019. And I checked the PA Court's website, at least as of December, they've sealed over 48 million records across the state, including in Dauphin County, 620,000 non-convictions, 807,000 summary convictions, and 3,700 misdemeanor convictions. So basically this program is going to be running on a going forward basis, and the records that are eligible for sealing are going to be reported to PSP within 30 days of completion of the sentence and payment of those financial obligations. So I think that that's a great hope for people moving forward. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to move to limited access, which is sometimes referred to as Act 5 limited access. That's just the portion of the statute where you find it. But because there are so many different terms thrown around, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew if you see limited access or Act 5 limited access, and it's even sometimes called Clean Slate limited access. This is all the same thing, believe it or not. So I'm just going to call it limited access. Was originally enacted in December 2018. It is broader than Clean Slate. Originally, it was intended as a way for individuals to get their records sealed before the automatic process began. It is not automatic. It does require you to file a petition. And like Clean Slate, it's a sealing mechanism, so the record is still going to exist. It's not like an expungement, but it is hidden from public view so that certain employers, individuals, landlords, people who are running criminal record checks who aren't, the FBI or the State Department of Human Services aren't going to be able to see the record. And I have a note here, of course, like Clean Slate, certain entities can still access it. And I have, of course, law enforcement, as I mentioned, licensing agencies, and DHS or CYS, where Child Protective Services are relevant. Next slide, please. So who's eligible for limited access? Similar to Clean Slate, we've got the second-degree misdemeanors and the third-degree misdemeanors, but also first-degree misdemeanors, which are the more serious versions, are captured in this program, as well as the catch-all ungraded offense carrying a max penalty of 5 years or less in prison. You have to have remained free from conviction of another misdemeanor or felony for the last 10 years. And as usual, you have to have paid all your court-ordered financial obligations. So just to recap, Clean Slate, second-degree misdemeanors and third-degree misdemeanors, limited access, first-degree, second-degree, and third-degree misdemeanors. Next slide, please. Of course, there's a list of exclusions. You'll find that they are basically identical to the Clean Slate list of exclusions. I'm not going to run through them all again, but it's the typical firearms, family, sex offenses, or conspiracy to commit any of the above. Next slide, please. Similar to Clean Slate, there's also a list of disqualifying convictions, which means if you've ever been convicted of any of these types of crimes, you may be ineligible, although limited access has certain year caps that may allow you to be eligible anyway. So first, if you've ever been convicted of murder or any first-degree felony or any other felony punishable by 20 or more years in prison, unfortunately, you're just not going to be eligible for limited access. If you've been convicted in the last 20 years of any of these offenses, a felony punishable by 7+ years involving danger to a person, firearms, offenses against family, or sexual offenses, or 4 or more offenses punishable by imprisonment of 2+ years, you're not going to be eligible. Now, of course, that's a 20-year limit. So if it's been 21 years, you may be eligible, even though you have those records of conviction. And then there's also a 15-year cap if you've been convicted of indecent exposure, abuse of animals, failure to register as a sex offender, weapons violations, abuse of a corpse or paramilitary training, and then 2 or more offenses punishable by imprisonment of 2+ years. So once again, it's a 15-year cap. If you've made it 16 years with a clean slate, so to speak, then you may be eligible. And I again put a footnote here because this list of exceptions is not exhaustive. There is quite a additional list available on the PA Court's website. Next slide, please. So really briefly, how it works, I put on the left side of your screen here a little screenshot of the actual petition because it's available for download. It's a fillable PDF from the PA Court's website, and the address is here, although I realize it looks like nonsense, but you can find it by going to the Pennsylvania Court's website under limited access, and you can find it there. Basically, you need to file the petition with the clerk of courts where your conviction occurred. There will be fees. The state fee is $132, and there will be probably a county related and a filing fee that you'll have to pay to the clerk of courts when you file. After you file, the court will notify the local district attorney within 10 days, and the DA has 30 days to object. If the DA objects, then the court will schedule a hearing on the petition, and you'll have an opportunity to present your arguments, and the DA will likewise present their reasons why they've objected. And then the court will determine after the hearing if it's going to grant the petition. If the DA doesn't object, then the petition will be granted without a hearing. And once it's granted, notice is going to be sent to the local criminal justice agencies to limit access to the records. Next slide, please. And just a quick note on the impact of limited access. As of December 2020, there have been about 3,800 offenses sealed through limited access petitions that have been filed, including 112 in Dauphin County. And I think that's it, but could you advance to the next slide? Oh, no, just kidding. Mm-hmm. I guess I did want to note here that if you are eligible for clean slate and limited access and your records are sealed, you generally don't need to disclose the conviction, and you can lawfully state that you have no criminal record. But you should keep in mind that if you're applying to a position where the employer needs to require your criminal record according to federal law, then you need to disclose it. So if you're applying for a law enforcement position, or I think likely if you're a teacher, I don't know the other examples where criminal records are relevant, but then you would need to disclose it. And of course, if you're applying for a position where you know an FBI criminal background check is going to be run, you would want to disclose it because it's going to show up on that background check. Next slide, please. And this is I just dropped some resources here. These were some helpful websites as I was looking through. I know Sandy mentioned some local officials. I'm not trying to state support for one person or another. I just noticed that Representative Patty Kim's website has a particularly helpful FAQ on it. The Pennsylvania Court's website is a good resource always. And then Community Legal Services out of Philadelphia is a nonprofit that has some helpful things as well. Although of course it could be slightly different because they're a different county. So I think that concludes on clean slate and limited access.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah and Dave and Kara. I do want to share one hypothetical question. If someone has a disorderly conduct summary offense from 1987 and no arrests or prosecution for 5 years after that, they should indeed be able to fill out the expungement form and pursue that option. That would be one of the very few opportunities I see as far as a regular expungement. Anyone want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's correct, Sandy. again, I don't want to get too bogged down in the history of this, but what started out as the opportunity to expunge certain misdemeanors of the second and third degree ended up, after our political sausage making process, as the ability to expunge certain summaries. So that person would definitely be eligible and could get that record expunged and wiped away.
And they should fill out the form. I put it, I can copy it for a larger group. I just put it in the chat. I'll post it here for everyone. The Pennsylvania expungement form. Now, David doesn't have a whole lot of instructions with that form. Is that something that someone can just fill out by themselves?
You know, I haven't looked closely at it, Sandy, so I don't want to. I don't want to opine too clearly on it, but I don't think it's super complicated. Now, what you always have to be cognizant of is it may ask you for docket numbers and you know, locations of court and things like that. So to the extent you can get your hands on that, it might be helpful. I was talking with someone who had an almost 30-year-old dismissal of a case in Virginia that the dismissal came up, but it was nearly impossible to find records. So the more information you have before you fill it out, the better off you'll be. And that information being date, time, location, and then of course, if you have any numbers attached to the citation or the court, that will be helpful as well.
And I think, as Kara said, you need to get some kind of record from the state police. Can you remind us of that, Kara?
Sure. It's you have to get an official copy of your criminal record. So the Pennsylvania State Police, or who you need to obtain that from, they have a form. Off the top of my head, I don't know a link, but maybe, I don't know if Sandy does, or if on their website of the Pennsylvania State Police, there's a form that you fill out to request a copy, and Dave clarified that it's a $10 fee. So we always recommend to obtain that first if you are pursuing an expungement.
Great, thank you. That was the only question. I think there were some things a little bit back and forth, but we covered them pretty well. Were there any other questions I missed?
I was just gonna say, unless there's a question. I was just gonna say one last thing. You know, what I've learned from some of these clinics where it's, and I'm hoping that we host one in the future, but really it's an intake interview where individuals come, we look at your criminal record, we really try to give you initial, it's not legal advice, but we try to give you initial guidance on maybe if you are eligible or if you are not eligible, maybe you should contact MidPenn and they can assist you. And we know it's very overwhelming, especially when your record has various convictions, non-conviction data, felonies, misdemeanors, summary offenses. There's a combination of all of these things. I don't want people to get discouraged, and I'm sure none of us do, because it seems overwhelming. And that's why we are doing this. And that's why we will continue to do the clinics, and we'll try our best to help guide you through this. So I guess my message is just please don't feel too overwhelmed to try, because it may, yeah, you know, I know that a lot of people are seeking employment and it's really a hindrance or housing. So I just wanted to put that out there, and we'll send out information when we have another one of these intake clinics, and maybe I'll be lucky enough to get Sarah and Dave involved, but we'll see.
And we'll be sure to share that with the library as well, so they can help us promote that.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I was speaking for the library, but absolutely.
No, that's okay. That's okay. If we don't have any more questions, I think we're safe to wrap it up. I want to say thank you so much again, Sandy, and thank you, Kara and David and Sarah, for sharing these resources and for such a wonderful, informative presentation. There was a lot of stuff in here that I hadn't even thought about before, things that I learned. So this is a great resource for us, and for anybody watching watching this back, please feel free to reach out for any of the resources that were linked in the chat. My email is eanderson@dcls.org. You're more than able to reach out to me, and I'll get those resources out to you. Want to say thank you once again. Sorry, Sandy, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to put in, someone asked about the recording, and that will be posted. Where can they find it?
Thank you. That'll be on our adult programs at the library, our Facebook page, and also I believe on our Dauphin County Library System page, Facebook page, and then it'll also be on our YouTube page at Dauphin County Library System. So.
Great, thanks.
Well, thank you so much again, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Good night.